So we live in this world that's just packed with variety, right? You've got different cultures, totally different values, and of course, all these different generations. But how does it all actually work? Like, how do we all manage to live together? That's what we're going to dig into today, the invisible forces that make it all possible.
Yeah, that's really the big question, isn't it? When you've got so many differences, what are the invisible rules of the road that keep everything from falling apart? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down.
All right, section one, a world of difference. To really get how we all coexist, we've got to start by looking at the two big, let's call them blueprints that societies use to manage all this diversity. Yeah, a good way to think about this is like choosing an operating system for an entire country. And there are really two major models for handling all this diversity. The differences between them, they're absolutely crucial. Okay, so on one hand, you've got what's called multiculturalism. Think of it like a big, beautiful mosaic. You have all these different cultures existing side by side, and no single one is considered the main or dominant one. Then, on the other hand, you have pluralism. This one's a little more like a stew. Yeah, the minority groups are in there, they participate fully, but it's all happening within the flavor of a pre-existing dominant culture.
And this right here, this image, really gets to the heart of it. Look, with multiculturalism, there's no single dominant culture. But with pluralism, there is. And that one little distinction, it fundamentally changes everything about how a society sees itself.
All right, rules for a diverse society, one truth or many. Okay, so let's go a layer deeper now. We've talked about the big societal structures, but what about the core beliefs that actually power them? Our fundamental ideas about what's right and what's wrong. This is where we get into those ethical operating systems that are running in the background, guiding our decisions. They're not always obvious, but trust me, they shape pretty much everything. So let's break down the three main ways people look at this. First up, you've got something called ethical monism. This is the belief that there's basically one single, universal rule book for morality, one ultimate truth. So what's right for you is right for me, is right for everyone, everywhere, no exceptions. It's very clear-cut, very absolute. Now, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have ethical relativism. This viewpoint says, nope, there is no single rulebook. Instead, every culture, every community gets to have its own, and each one is just as valid as the next. The truth? It's all relative. And then you've got this middle ground, ethical pluralism. This idea accepts that, hey, there can be more than one genuinely correct moral framework. But, and this is a big but, it also knows that sometimes these truths can totally clash with each other. And that forces us into that really tricky space of having to make these tough right versus right decisions. So this diagram here shows how it all kind of connects. See, if you start on the left and believe that all values basically boil down to one single thing, let's say happiness, you're going to land in monism. But if you believe there are multiple competing values that you can't just simplify, well, you either end up in pluralism, where you're trying to balance them all, or you go to relativism, where you just say, hey, every community's rules are legitimate. Okay, finding our common ground. So we've got these different models for society, and we've got these conflicting ideas about what's right and wrong. It kind of seems like we're just destined to disagree, right? But is there anything at all, that actually ties us all together? And that's really the core question, isn't it? With all these frameworks that seem to divide us, is there some kind of bedrock of values that's common to all of humanity? Well, some really interesting research suggests the answer is, yeah, maybe. So one fascinating study dug into this and found 4 values that just keep popping up again and again across all kinds of cultures. Number 1, a commitment to something bigger than yourself. 2, self-respect, being responsible. 3, respect for other people, the classic golden rule. And 4, caring for living things and the environment. Maybe, just maybe, this is the common ground we're all standing on. All right, next up, generations, a living example. Let's move away from all the theory for a minute and look at a real-world example we all live with every single day, the generation gap. I mean, this is where you can see these different value systems playing out in real time, right in front of us. Seriously, think about it. Each generation is almost like its own mini culture. It's shaped by the big events, the technology of its time, everything. So let's start with the baby boomers, who've actually shown a pretty remarkable ability to adapt. I mean, get this. A 431% jump in baby boomers using grocery delivery and pickup apps in just 1 year. That's not just adapting. That is a massive behavioral shift. It proves this generation will absolutely embrace new tools when they need to. And it's the exact same story with telehealth. We're talking a nearly 470% increase. But here's the really interesting part, the key insight. They embrace the tech for convenience, sure, but for stuff that requires trust, like sharing sensitive information, they tend to default back to the old ways, like talking in person or on the phone. And that shows a value system where that personal connection still outweighs pure digital ease. It's this cool blend of old values and new tools. Okay, next up, we've got Gen Y, or millennials. Now, they were the first truly tech-savvy generation. They grew up as the internet was growing up. They were sometimes called the me generation, and their values often prioritized experiences, like traveling or dining out, over owning physical assets. And yeah, they were generally more open to taking on debt for things like getting a degree. And then, right on their heels, you have Gen Z. And the contrast here is just fascinating. They're not just tech-savvy, the term is tech-innate. A world without a smartphone in their pocket is basically ancient history to them. And unlike the me generation, they're often seen as a we generation. They're really focused on saving money and taking collective action. It's a huge shift in values in a really short amount of time. This chart really lays out that whole generational divide so clearly. For example, just look at the contrast in money habits. You go from Gen Y being pretty open to debt to Gen Z being really focused on saving. Or look at their lifestyles, shifting from what's called millennial armchair activity to Gen Z being active volunteers. You can see how each generation's profile is a direct response to the world that they grew up in. So here's the big takeaway from all this. It's not just about multiculturalism between, say, different countries. We've got this kind of multi-generationalism happening right in our own homes, in our offices, where each generation is basically operating with its own distinct set of values and priorities. And that brings us to the final and I think most critical question. We've just seen how values can shift, and shift dramatically from one generation to the next. So as technology keeps making that change happen faster and faster, are those 4 universal values we talked about, purpose, self-respect, the golden rule, and caring for the world, are they going to be enough to hold us all together in the future? That is definitely something to think about.